You're listening to Ecosysteming, the podcast redefining economic development through the lens of equitable entrepreneurship, 2 decades in the making. Join NC Idea's Tom Rue as he engages with entrepreneurs and experts who are challenging the status quo and driving lasting change.
Hello, listeners of the Ecosysteming podcast. Today it is my great pleasure to welcome Ann Wiper, CEO of the North Carolina Textile Innovation and Sustainability Engine. Ann, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Oh, super happy to join you, Tom.
You know, that title is a bit of a mouthful, North Carolina Textile Innovation and Sustainability Engine. And we're going to jump into that. We're going to go deep on what that all is, because that's one of several reasons that you are fascinating to get to know and understand the work that you're doing. But for the sake of the listeners of the podcast, can you kick us off with just a little background? You know, you're just a brief stroll through your very impressive CV, especially the big brands that you've worked for.
Sure, happy to. I do have to say I feel like the job I have now is the opportunity of a lifetime, and it's built on everything that I've learned to date. And I think it especially works because my background is so complementary to those that I work with, which I'm sure we'll get to this in the podcast. But going back on how did I get here? I think the first thing is I grew up with a love of the outdoors and the environment. Spent my earliest years in Fort Lauderdale. Not many people know that or guess that. And we grew up very close to the beach. My dad had taken a new job. He was a tech guy before they were called tech guys. And I was born in Ohio, but they were waiting for me to be born, and we moved to Fort Lauderdale. And so, grew up kind of on the beach. I was very much a water girl and baby, but at a certain point, my dad was an entrepreneur, and at a certain point, the company he started got bigger than he had fun dealing with, and so we started doing these crazy trips across the country in an Airstream trailer and went all over Canada one summer, went all over the US, and we were in Colorado. And my dad said, "Hey, I think I want to start another company. The workforce base is best either here in Colorado or in California. Let's take a family vote." And so we all voted for Colorado because we felt like it was a bigger difference. And so I think I was 14, flew home. Um, so this is where I realized I did not have a normal life. We flew home in 2 weeks. We packed up the house, got movers, sold the house, and drove our other car back to Colorado, where we lived in our Airstream trailer while we started school. And then that was the next chapter. So my dad started another company, and I think tying back to the outdoor life, I learned how to ski, we backpacked, I learned how to rock climb. This is what I love. So first job was actually working for my dad's company, which was a tech company. And I decided this was not the life I wanted. So I got my MBA, started working in an outdoor store in Denver, and ended up getting a job at Nike. And
I've heard of that company.
I know it's crazy. I started on the ACG line, all conditions gear, because I had outdoor sports background, knew all the brands in the space, had been a buyer, and it ended up kind of opening the door to being a product line manager at Nike, first on apparel and then on footwear. So I got to work on both sides, which was fairly unusual, and ended up in growing in that organization, which was such a fun place to be in the early 90s. So I actually worked for Nike through 97, and those were some crazy growth years. Ended up running the running business in Europe as kind of in my mid to late 20s, which is crazy. I also had two little boys, and that was kind of that's a lot to do when you have a 12-month-old and a 2.5-year-old. But um,
Were you in Europe, living in Europe at the
yeah,
time?
we were in outside of Amsterdam in a small town that the office was in Hilversum. And so, such a cool experience. So, got to work on both footwear and apparel at Nike and worked on primarily the outdoor business and then the running footwear business. So, working in kind of the heart and soul of the brand. I had an amazing experience there. I loved working for Nike, but I discovered I was one of the top 200 travelers in Nike, which you really don't want to be because that means you're traveling all the time. And had two little ones. My mom had gotten cancer and she was in Colorado. And I got a call from Solomon to work on the footwear business for Solomon. And they were opening a design center in Boulder. And I was like, yes, please. So I went and interviewed in France and ended up taking that job and had the opportunity to lead the team to reinvent footwear for Solomon, which was um, it's really the foundation. It was the foundational work for what that brand is really living and thriving on right now. And so super proud of the work our team did. Got to work in a very multicultural environment. Had an amazing footwear team on 3 continents, and once again, great experience, great team. Which I think I've been so fortunate to work in environments where there were just amazing combinations of people, which I mean, looking back now, I know I had a lot to do with that, but it also, I think when you have a great team, that's when the magic comes. And it's, I'm really happy I'm in that situation again. I feel like I'm one of the blessed people in my career that I've been able to make that happen. But from there, I went just as I they moved everything back from Boulder to Annecy in France, and I was able to take 9 months off and hang with my boys in Boulder and be a Boulder mom, which is kind of the best job in the world. And
Yeah, Boulder's a cool town.
it's really fun to actually be able to like stay there, live there, and volunteer at your kid's school. That was like one of my favorite parts of my life. But knowing I needed to get a job again, I did take a job with Pearl Izumi, small cycling company, and it was great people, but just rough in general for a lot of reasons. But you learn from every situation. Great product, great brand, just kind of a tough scenario. But then I got a call from Smartwool, and so they had approached me before moving to Steamboat, but my husband at the end of all of it said, I don't want to live in Steamboat. So that got canned. But then they came back again and said, we're going to open a design office and a product office in Boulder. Are you in? And I'm like, yep, I'm in. So um, I was there 17 and a half years.
Wow.
So it really was small when I started, kind of a nice little sock brand. And then we were able to It got acquired by VF about, I don't know, it was 2010 or 11. VF largely left us alone until everything got moved to Denver. And that's a gross simplification, but I'm just going to say that for now.
Sure.
And ended up really growing the brand to a very significant size. And it was over 10 times what it was when I started. So super fun to kind of be able to lead something very small and entrepreneurial into a bigger corporate brand. But um, I realized about a year ago that I felt like I wasn't learning, I wasn't thriving in that kind of corporate space. I wanted more of a challenge. And so I actually quit my job and decided to take a little bit of time off and think about next steps. And all of a sudden, here comes Molly Hemstreet with the Industrial Commons with, "Hey, I've got an idea for you." But we had worked together for the last 4 years. I think the thing I'm the most proud of in my background is the project that we started during COVID at Smartwall, which was we were cleaning everything out of our Boulder office, and there was um, just so much material like development socks, fabric headers, bolts of fabric. And I'm like, we can't throw this away. What are we going to do with it? And so I had called friend at Manufacturing Solution Center, MSC, and said, "Hey, we want to really figure out a circularity program. Don't want to get rid of this. This would be great material to get it going. Do you know anybody who's trying to make this happen?" And it was Dan St. Louis, and Dan said, "I have the person for you." And so that was the beginning of what is now an extraordinary project called Second Cut at Smartwell, where you take old socks and canister waste from mills, and the team was able to actually make new yarn out of those old post-consumer socks. And now it's a really significant program at Smartwell. So super proud of that, but it really opened the door to what I'm doing now.
So, speaking of what you're doing now, well, first of all, I got to say one thing. As I was hearing you go deep cut, it is amazing to me. We have so many common life experiences. Going, first of all, Ohio born, which most awesome people are born in Ohio. I grew up as a water kid, now admittedly on the North Coast, which we affectionately refer to as the Great Lakes region. So, but I was a water rat my whole childhood. We had boats and canoes and kayaks, and I was always doing stupid things, mostly in Lake Erie, but Lake Michigan. We get up to Lake Superior at times, but just having that whole experience. And then when my parents, being immigrants, when we decided to move out of the starter home that they had the first bought, we built a house, and my father, my brother, and I did most of the construction living in a camper on the lot, on the building lot for almost, it was about 8 weeks. And my mother and sister, they would triage meals and clean clothes from the home until that was sold and transitioned, and then we all lived in the camper for the last week before we moved into the new house. So I'm listening to you tell that, and I was thinking, how strange and how uncommon could it be that we've had such similar life experiences, but kind of cool if you ask me. So I'm going to jump in and augment just a little bit because I got involved with the engine project prior to you coming on board. And for the listeners that don't know what it is we're talking about, and actually, I'm going to let you practice the elevator pitch here. Why don't you briefly explain what these NSF engines are, and how it is that we've got one, we being North Carolina, how we've got actually two, and that you don't need to get into the other one so much, but what is that, so that the listener understands when we say NSF or we say engine, they understand what it is we're referring to.
Okay. Um, so just to start, NSF, for those not in so much of the science and innovation space, is the National Science Foundation. And the National Science Foundation really has been the core of funding, I would say, primarily university driven projects to further research. And I think most of the Nobel Prize winners have had the NSF and funding in their background. So it's a very innovation, science driven organization. But as part of the Inflation Reduction Act, I think that was passed in 2022, there was the Chips and Science Act as part of that, and that is the entity that has funded a very innovative program called the Engines program. And so engines are collaborative groups, usually led by a nonprofit or a university, but working with um, a whole group of people to get these grants and organizations. So it's universities, community colleges, nonprofits. And the whole purpose of the engine is to use technology and innovation to drive regional economic growth, um, particularly in regions where it maybe kind of the tech boom has passed them by, and using, I'm just going to call them green technologies, and technologies that will drive a positive climate impact for the region. And so there's 10 engines, and this is a huge program. It's the biggest program since the land grant universities, and all in, it's $1.6 billion across the 10 engines. So it's a huge investment in growing regions. And ours is focused on the textile industry. And if anybody from North Carolina knows that the textile industry, first of all, this is the epicenter of it in the United States, but it's been dramatically impacted by all of the offshoring that has happened. So production moving to China. But ironically, North Carolina State, who is one of our core partners, is a globally recognized textile science university. So we have the tech and so much of the potential for innovation here. We still have a lot of the infrastructure here, which is not being optimized in any way. And so we have a really unique scenario. We also still, and this is, I mean, the time is ticking, we have the knowledge and expertise. So some of the best spinning experts in the world are here, but that population is retiring. And so the time is is to act is really now. So the engines each have four main pillars. So the first one is use inspired R&D, which in our case is led by Melissa Sharp. She's at NC State. She's the deputy CEO of the engine. And she has an amazing science background. So she's really leading that work.
And she is the associate director at the Zeiss Textiles Extension.
She is. So she's at the Wilson College of Textiles, which we have amazing partners there. We have Dean Hanks has been a huge supporter of the engine program. We have several of the professors there that are um, incredible contributors to this. Dr. Andre West is also on our board, and I'll mention Tom is our chairman of the board. Thank you. You are my boss.
Hardly, but it's a joy to serve.
But I appreciate it so much. So the next pillar is translation, which in industry terminology is really commercialization. So how do we take that innovation, R&D, and really translate that to scale and commercial success? Because that's how we're going to grow the regional economy. And I'm leading that work just because of my background in innovation, in product creation on all the companies I've worked in, but also the fact that I have worked for the brands that can be our key partners in this space as we're trying to kind of match the supply with demand. So what we
Right.
work on, there's got to be a market for it. And if we're connected to that market from the beginning, we're creating the right things for them. The next one is workforce development, which is critically important also because we have this old view of what the textile industry is. And I would say pretty negative perception because most of the people in this region have been impacted by the textile industry moving offshore. Like either it's your family that lost jobs or somebody you know, but it's impacted many in this region. And the next generation of this industry is going to look different. The output, whether it be yarn, materials, can look the same, but how that happens is going to look really different. And that's a lot more tech skills, their science skills, their trade skills to be able to support the automation and robotics and electrical needs all the way up to programming and chemistries for how do we shift things from being toxic processing that is happening overseas to green chemistry that is clean and we should be doing that here. Um, and then really the last pillar, so we've got to develop the workforce that is capable of addressing that and then making sure that we can build in apprenticeship programs so that that knowledge and skill set of the older generation gets transferred to the younger generations.
Make it a viable career path, so to speak,
Correct.
in what we euphemistically refer to as a heritage industry.
Correct. And so, how do we kind of open up the potential for that? But we're doing incredible work already. K through 12, we're doing a high school. Literally, it happened, started Monday and Tuesday of this week, where we're working with the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, and we have gotten the opportunity to update the curriculum for what was formerly called Apparel 1 for high school students, now is Textile Fundamentals. And we are working with teachers across the state to build this new curriculum. And it's focused on kind of what does the new, first of all, the fundamentals of how do you make things, and then opening the door to what does sustainability mean and how do you bring in those opportunities with textile circularity, which we can talk about, where you take discarded textiles, which everybody's hearing about, and turn that into new yarn, new fabrics, and it's a fundamentally different way of thinking about what are your inputs, how do you make that happen, but we're opening the door for high school students to say, oh, wow, there is a path here. And then we're partnering that
Right.
with community college resources and then all linking that to university programs like NC State, where you can go into design, merchandising, textile science, and chemistry, and all the way through the PhD level.
Do you think the masses, the public, truly understands the economic impact of textile circularity?
Absolutely not.
Yeah, I mean, it was a leading question.
Yeah.
Sorry to lead the witness there. And so I'm teeing that question up for you to explain, really make the case. What is circularity? Why should we care? And in particular, why should we care in kind of the geographic footprint of the engine, specifically with North Carolina kind of being the center of it, but also the periphery states that are also included in the service envelope of the engine?
Yes. So, circularity in general, like let's talk about what the world has been first. We've had a very linear approach to product. So essentially, you take resources, brand new resources, you make it into something, it gets used, and then it gets thrown away. This has been the model. That's the linear economy. What the circular economy is okay, shift your thinking on that. Say, what are your inputs? Can they be recycled content? Um, then you design something that ideally can last through multiple use cycles. And so there's a reuse, a repair, and then consumers use it and hopefully multiple times, and then there's an end of life plan for those things that you're done using. So let's say it's a t-shirt. Um, Probably not the best example. It's nice to have a higher value, but let's say you get done using that t-shirt, you take it to Goodwill. Somebody is like, "Oh my gosh, I love your 80s concert t-shirt. I want to wear it as a vintage thing." It gets used again. So it gets sold and used again, and hopefully it gets used again multiple times. But at the end of its use, it's got too many holes, you can't call it cool anymore. And it then what happens to it? So right now, it ends up in a landfill. It ends up um, being exported to other countries that probably don't get used either and ends up in a big trash cycle. But what could happen? What could happen is your 100% cotton t shirt could be mechanically recycled, made into new yarn, and then it goes back into a new t-shirt again. And so all of a sudden, you're turning textile waste into what I'm going to say is rooted wealth. Because what's unique about North Carolina is all of those resources exist here. The grinders or garnetters are actually here. We can grind that up. We can clean and blend it with new yarn to create a beautiful new yarn, and then it can be spun here in North Carolina. It can be knit into new fabric or woven into new fabric here in North Carolina. And so all of a sudden, this waste stream has turned into something that can drive great new jobs in this area.
What countries or states are doing it best?
I would say Europe is ahead of us. So I'm going to a region. Um, in that there is government policy that is mandating change, and they have what's called an extended producer responsibility. So as of this year, brands have to um, pay a fee if they do not have a path for the end of life of their product.
Sort of like carbon credits.
It gets into that a little bit different. The tire industry already does this with, but the retailers have to pay it. So when you get new tires on your car, they have to recycle those tires. And that is largely funded by the retailers having to pay that. And do the consumers pay? Yes. But you also don't find tires are getting reused. That rubber is getting reused now. You don't see like a field of tires anymore where they're just dumped. Um, so that material is put to longer use. California, I think it was in September, passed an EPR on textiles, so an extended producer responsibility. New York is likely to do that next. And what that means, I mean, with the new administration coming in and new priorities, it probably won't move as fast. But with most of these brands being global and the requirements they have for selling in Europe, with California and most likely New York moving in this direction, brands are going to come up with a comprehensive universal solution. They are not going to piece out production with different ideas and requirements. And in a way, it might slow things down a little bit so everybody can get their ducks in a row on how to do this. But I would I would hope for environmental reasons, for regional economy reasons, that we do move in this direction sooner than later because that EPR fee will help fund what it will take to make this business model really work, and it will eliminate the trash that's being generated from textiles. So I actually am pretty optimistic about where this industry will go and the impact that it will have in our region. And the brands that I'm talking to are really taking the long view and saying, we need to come up with a solution here. Um, and it's across the board from mainstream retailers and brands all the way to kind of the known entities like Patagonia, Eileen Fisher, Smartwool that have really invested in how do we make product better. The cost formula will work, but you have to get it to scale to be able to do that.
How early, kind of in this process, supply chain, engine, whatever you want to refer to it as, how early is our work considering? And here's where I'm going with this. Like we have in the work that NCID has done, we're seeing a lot of promising tech in ag tech and the way we grow certain fibers like hemp, right? Or I remember one startup that applied many years ago. They wanted funding to make milkweed a viable fiber, cotton fiber. And we're working with companies like Patagonia. And so that's another area when you think about like the rich textile history of the state of North Carolina. We have a little bit of knowledge and history in growing things too. He says tongue in cheek. And so are we considering kind of like that, from the field, the fiber from the field, before it even gets woven into that first gen product? Is that part of what we're considering?
Yes. So really there's two buckets of work because we're focusing on sustainable and regenerative fibers. And so in our translation pillar, we're working on circularity, which I mean is basically kind of reclaiming value through materials. But to really win, we need to look at fiber, how it's originated, And so we are focusing on hemp. We are working to build consortiums for both of those groups.
Can I interrupt you for a second? I've had the benefit of somebody explaining this to me, but for our user, our listeners, the podcast, why is hemp considered a superior fiber to just a generic cotton fiber?
Excellent question. So hemp has it's a stronger fiber. It also has some performance characteristics like antimicrobial type um, characteristics. So it's not going to stink the way some other things do. Um, the other thing, which is kind of interesting about natural fibers in general, because we have had a lot of interest from the DoD, Department of Defense, on the work we're doing also, because apparently natural fibers don't have a heat signature. And so there's a number of reasons just from comfort, the performance of garments, and what you can expect from them.
Isn't it a longer fiber as well?
It can be. It is a longer fiber. It depends on how it's processed and how it's grown,
Got it.
but it has a ton of benefits. And I think but almost the biggest benefits is what's required to grow it. And so it takes very little supplemental anything. So pesticides is a big category that's both, insecticides as well as fertilizer. And so hemp doesn't need much, which cotton requires more. And so really focusing on, if you think about organic fertilizers like compost, that counts in that category. So it takes very little and it also requires very little water. And so the sporadic kind of climate conditions that we've had, hemp seems to still thrive in that cycle of, okay, it's really dry for a while. Okay, it's really wet for a while. Um, and what's been super cool with the engine work is there's a group in the NC State Ag Department, David Sukoff, Dr. Sukoff has been doing incredible work um, with hemp in kind of the biggest scope of it, but on how do you grow textile quality hemp. And it's been super cool. I got to go to the research farm and just to see their progress over time, because what they've learned is how you plant it really matters. So the density of seed within a square yard, you're trying to grow a plant that gets as tall as possible, but that's only the diameter of a like number two pencil.
Wow.
And because that gives you the highest quality of fiber. And so it's just been so interesting to me. I'm kind of a hobby farmer, but just to see what they've done and how far they've gotten on the research. So we can leverage that to farmers in the region that, oh, and okay, other benefit of hemp, it returns nitrogen to the soil. So it actually improves the soil health. And so you put all those things together, we need to work to develop regenerative practices so that companies can say, hey, this is regeneratively grown hemp. And ideally, this is what I'm kind of looking into right now. We can work with farmers on carbon credits that can help fund this transition to hemp as a crop. And it really, consumers then can look at it and say, from fiber to farm, I know what I'm wearing. I know what I'm putting on my body. I know the people behind it. And so putting together that whole supply chain from farmers to processors, which there's amazing investment right now going in Lumberton, North Carolina, all the way through um, degummers, spinners, fabric weavers like Valdez Weavers, working with Meridian. And it's pretty incredible that we can put the whole thing together here. And brands are really interested in that.
Well, it makes it convenient, right? You can plug in where you need to, and it's fun. I'm smirking a little bit. The listener can't see that, but because before we even hired you, we were working on the branding of this engine, and I'm an old ad guy, and I was like, oh, everything farm to table is so cool. So like, we've really got a possibility here, like from farm to fiber to fabric, right? The 3F model, and that's important because as you've established very well, we've got that whole chain right here in the state of North Carolina. So if you want to accelerate, innovation in that space, you can plug in wherever you want to, and it's multidisciplinary. And it leads me to kind of my next question, and that is, so the engine's the engine, and we've got this great leader in you with this incredible background and experience, and you bring industry to the table. But that's not enough. I mean, we still have to build this coalition, right? This network of partners. And I was hoping you could take a minute or two and just really talk about like what it's been like working with, the partners we've already established. That NC State is a big part of this, and sitting in on the board meetings, I can vouch for that. They are an incredible partner and value add. But it's not just them. It's not just the Industrial Commons and the Manufacturing Solutions Center. Can you talk a little bit about the partner network and why we're seeing great leverage? And frankly, I think why NSF is excited about this engine, because what I hear through my channels is they're pretty darn pleased with the work so far that you and Molly have been leading and reporting on. And a big part of that is because of this partner, this unprecedented network that we've put together. Can you just a minute or two, if you wouldn't mind?
Absolutely. And I didn't talk about the industrial commons. I think that is kind of the epicenter of inspiration. And I think genius to have that as the funded entity. And so I really see the work of the industrial commons, which was founded by Molly Hemstreet, Sarah Chester, and what they are doing, what we're trying to do is really scale that up to a much bigger impact. But the impact on the industrial commons in Burke County has been incredible. So, um, Molly started Opportunity Threads as a cut and sew operation, which is now, I think, the biggest upcycling cut and sew operation that's it's profitable here in Burke County, and partnered up with Sarah Chester with her economic development background. And they have put together this incredible ecosystem of entities that are really, they were need based. Like we needed a worker training program. So they started Work in Burke. They networked with multiple cut and sew operations with Carolina Textile District that they founded. Um, and so everywhere you turned around, they just started filling in blanks for what was needed in Burke County, focused on textiles. But NC State comes in as a core partner with a amazing kind of investment in research across ag and textiles, which is pretty incredible. Gaston College comes in with an amazing background in piloting spinning techniques, fiber innovation, and textile training. We've got Western Piedmont, who is here in Burke County, that has partnered with the Industrial Commons. They're working on a virtual reality training program with Valdez Weavers, which is, I mean, as cool as it gets on taking those game skills that are out there and how do you translate that to a new automated workplace. And then partnering up with NC Idea with Tom, helping to us to bring that entrepreneurial approach into the engine in how do we put together RFPs and grant programs that can really further innovation in the state to the Department of Commerce. The network of resources with expertise is phenomenal. And I am happy that NSF is happy with what we're doing, but I feel like we just can't even move fast enough. I'm like, wow, it's just so much to build and do in a short period of time. But I really do believe this is an opportunity of a lifetime to do the right thing for people, for the industry, and really for the planet. But it's amazing to me that we can make all of those things work as we're doing this and building this engine.
Well, for our part, we just feel lucky to be involved. And, you said at the very beginning of your background that your current role and what you're doing was an opportunity of your lifetime where all your prior experiences have culminated to make you this person at this moment in history to lead this effort. And that is yet another thing that you and I have in common, because I feel that's exactly how I describe my opportunity to lead NC Idea. And now taking all this great entrepreneurial energy, years ago already, we were funding companies that were doing things in hemp, for example, and in the ag tech space, and throw in their other technologies like IoT and figuring out how to be better farming resources. Like, we just feel like there's so much critical mass coming to a head, and it really speaks to the value and really what the theme of this podcast is: ecosysteming. Right, together we're stronger than we are independently, and it's that synergistic effect. So I like to wrap these podcasts by talking about our shared network. And what I do is I basically just go out and mine LinkedIn and go through our mutual contacts. And not surprisingly, and we've already mentioned Melissa, we share as a mutual connection at NC State. Also in that list would be Heather McWhorter, who's the director of the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship on the coast out at UNC Wilmington. She's doing some fantastic work there too. And a lot of the blue ocean economy efforts are really, we see overlap, right? When we talk like blue, maybe we don't use the word circular, but it's sustainability is the common thread to everything we're talking about in there. And then, rolling it up to the economic impact standpoint, we share a great friend in Napoleon Wallace, who has led some very important work at the state level and even continues to do so now, thinking about some partnerships he's putting together. So, the old adage, you can say a lot about a person by the company they keep. First of all, I feel privileged to keep you in my company, and the fact that we share such great company, I think, just affirms the potential of the work we're doing. And thank you. And thank you for taking on this adventure. With somebody with your credentials and accomplishments, to take a chance on a flyer, let alone, a government funded thing that was new. You're not in this role because you lack other options. You had to make that life choice. And I'm so happy that you chose to do this with us here in North Carolina. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm super grateful to have the opportunity to actually make a really big difference in our region and ultimately the world. This is incredible. And I can't think of anything that's more fulfilling than to be able to do that.
I'm right there with you. Thanks again for joining us on the podcast today.
Stay connected with NC Idea on LinkedIn and Facebook, and subscribe to our newsletter for all the latest as we celebrate our 20th year. Catch new episodes of Ecosysteming every other Tuesday. Thanks for tuning in and being a part of this thing of ours.